The modern world begins with a quiet certainty. That soil is temporary. That land, once used, begins to decline. That fertility must be added, measured, purchased, and replaced. It is presented as fact, scientific, unavoidable. And yet there was a time, not distant, not mythical, when land did the opposite. It improved, year after year, generation after generation. Fields did not collapse under use. They deepened, strengthened, remembered. Food did not exhaust the soil. It taught it how to grow more. This was not an experiment. It was not a rare exception. It was a system, a way of working with the ground so stable, so self-sustaining, that it produced harvests for centuries without decline. And then, quietly, it disappeared. Not because it failed, but because it could not be controlled. It could not be standardized. It could not be owned. And what cannot be owned rarely survives the systems that replaced it. Before we open this archive, do one thing. Subscribe to Seedtime Botanics. Not for updates, not for growth, but for preservation. Because what disappears is not always what is disproven. Sometimes it is simply what no one is left to remember. And tonight, we remember. The archive does not begin in a laboratory. It begins in land most people once called impossible. The Amazon basin, a place defined by extremes. Rain that falls in violent abundance, then vanishes for months. Rivers that swell into oceans, then retreat into narrow, winding lines. Soil that, by every modern measure, should not support long-term agriculture. Thin, acidic, leaching nutrients by centuries of rainfall. And yet, when European explorers entered this region in the early 16th century, they recorded something that did not align with those assumptions. In 1542, the expedition of Francisco de Orellana moved down the Amazon River. What they described was not a wilderness. It was a civilization. Villages lined the riverbanks. Gardens stretched beyond them. Fruit trees grew in dense clusters. Maize fields rose from the ground in abundance. Food was everywhere. It did not make sense. The soil should not have allowed it. But the soil was not what it appeared to be. Long before these records were written, the people of the Amazon had already understood something fundamental. Soil is not a resource. It is a system, and systems can be built. They did not clear land and plant into it. They constructed the ground itself, layer by layer, year by year. They took what others discarded. Food scraps, animal bones, plant residues, broken pottery, ash, charcoal, not burned quickly, but slowly, in low oxygen fires. A process that did not destroy organic matter, but transformed it. The result was a dark, carbon-rich substance that held its structure for centuries. They mixed this into the earth. Not once, not occasionally, continuously. Over generations, the soil changed. It deepened in color, from brown to black, dense, rich, alive. They called it terra preta, black earth, but the name did not capture what it truly was. It was not soil. It was a memory. If this is the first time you are encountering this system, stay with it. And if something here feels familiar, if it feels like knowledge you were meant to inherit, subscribe. Because this channel exists for exactly this moment. The moment when something buried begins to surface again. Under magnification, terra preta does not behave like ordinary earth. It resembles a network. The charcoal within it, what modern science now calls biochar, is not solid in the way it appears. It is porous, infinitely structured, a lattice of microscopic chambers. Each chamber becomes a shelter, a place where microorganisms live. Bacteria, fungi, invisible architects of fertility. These organisms do what no chemical system can replicate. They regulate. They adapt. They respond to the environment in real time. The charcoal holds water. During floods, nutrients remain. During droughts, moisture lingers. Nothing is lost. Everything is retained and slowly released. The soil does not spike. It stabilizes. And most importantly, it does not degrade. Fragments of charcoal found in these soils have been dated to over 2,000 years old. Still functioning. still supporting life. The ground becomes permanent, not because it resists time, but because it works with it. When historians return to the Amazon centuries later, the villages described by early explorers were gone. The gardens had vanished. The forests had reclaimed the land. Disease had moved faster than memory. Entire populations collapsed. Knowledge that had been passed through generations disappeared within decades. And without the people maintaining them, the systems faded. But the soil did not. It remained, hidden beneath layers of vegetation, scattered across the basin in patches, black against the surrounding earth. When farmers encountered it, they noticed something unusual. Crops grew differently, stronger, faster, more consistently. Yields did not decline. They improved. Year after year, the contradiction returned. And this time, the soil began to answer. By the late 20th century, scientists began to study these patches more closely. They measured nutrient levels, carbon content, microbial activity. What they found did not align with modern agricultural models. These soils contained higher concentrations of calcium, phosphorus, and organic carbon than surrounding land. Even after centuries of exposure to heavy rainfall, the nutrients had not leached away. They had been held in place, locked within the structure of the charcoal, available, but not lost. It was not simply fertile soil. It was engineered resilience, a system designed not for yield, but for permanence. And yet, even as this understanding grew, the system itself remained absent from mainstream agriculture. Not rejected, not disproven, simply unused. Before we go further, pause here. Look at what this implies. A soil system that builds itself, improves with time, requires no external input once established, and cannot be easily replicated on an industrial scale. If that challenges something you have been told about how food must be grown, subscribe. Because this is where the pattern begins to reveal itself. Industrial agriculture depends on predictability. Uniform crops, uniform inputs, uniform outputs. Fertilizer applied in exact quantities. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Measured, delivered, repeated. But terra preta does not behave like a formula. It cannot be produced quickly. It cannot be standardized across vast monocultures. It emerges slowly, differently in each location, dependent on local materials, local waste, local knowledge. It requires time, patience, and continuity across generations. It cannot be patented. It cannot be packaged. It cannot be owned. And so it became inconvenient, not because it failed, but because it did not fit. As agriculture industrialized, the focus shifted from systems that build fertility to systems that extract it. Chemical fertilizers replaced biological processes. Immediate yields increased. Production scaled. But something quieter began to change. Soil organic matter declined. Microbial diversity decreased. Erosion accelerated. Fields that once sustained themselves began requiring constant input. The system produced abundance, but it also produced dependence. Each year required more than the last. More fertilizer, more intervention, more corrections. The soil no longer built itself. It was consumed. There is another layer to this disappearance, one that is not ecological, but cultural. For the indigenous communities who built these systems, agriculture was not separate from identity. It was knowledge embedded in daily life, passed through observation, through practice, through repetition. When those communities were displaced, when languages were lost, when traditions were interrupted, the systems went with them. Not because they were inferior, but because they were no longer held. And knowledge that is not practiced does not survive. It does not sit waiting in books. It dissolves, quietly, until only fragments remain. Today, the world faces a familiar tension. Food systems have scaled to feed billions, but the ground beneath them shows strain. Topsoil is lost faster than it forms. Billions of tons each year. Fertility declines. Water retention weakens. Climate instability introduces new extremes. Drought, flood, heat. Under these conditions, efficiency begins to matter less. Resilience becomes the priority. And resilience is what these ancient systems were built for. Not maximum output, but survival across uncertainty. They held water when rain disappeared, retained nutrients when floods came, improved when stressed. They were not optimized for seasons. They were designed for centuries. In recent years, fragments of this knowledge have begun to return. Small farms, regenerative projects, researchers working with biochar. They are not recreating the original systems completely. They cannot. The cultural context is different. The continuity has been broken, but the principles remain. Soil as a living system, carbon as structure, time as a necessary ingredient. And slowly, quietly, the results begin to mirror what was once known. Improved yields, reduced water needs, increased stability, not through invention, but through rediscovery. If you have stayed this far, you understand what this is. Not new information, recovered information. Subscribe to Seed Time Botanics. Because this is not a single story, it is a pattern, and we will continue opening it. The most unsettling part of this system is not that it existed. It is that it never truly disappeared. The soil remained. The evidence remained. The results were visible. But the path forward had already been chosen. Infrastructure had been built. Economies structured. Entire industries aligned around a different model. Changing direction is difficult once everything depends on the current one. So the older system remained at the edges. Unnoticed. Unapplied. Not hidden. Simply ignored. And yet, the ground continues. Quietly. Patiently. It does not argue. It does not demand recognition. It responds to what is placed into it. Carbon, organic matter, time. Given those, it rebuilds. Given enough of them, it transforms. The black soils of the Amazon still exist. Still fertile. Still working. Centuries after the people who built them are gone. They do not require permission. They do not require belief. They continue. Perhaps that is the final lesson. That the knowledge was never truly lost. Only set aside. Because it did not fit the systems that replaced it. But systems change, conditions shift, and what was once inconvenient becomes necessary again. The soil remembers. It always has, and it will continue to remember long after the systems built on top of it have changed. If you value the preservation of knowledge that does not depend on ownership, subscribe to Seed Time Botanics. Not for content, for continuity. Because the ground beneath us is still holding answers. And it is not finished speaking.